You're listening to the Way of TBL's official podcast, Truth Talks with Sam and Alex.
Join us as we explore all things truth, beauty, and love.
Welcome to today's episode. We'll be diving into the topic, how fear can become a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, we know that what we focus on, we typically seem to manifest in our reality. And as the saying goes, where focus goes, energy flows. And also what you think, you become.
Absolutely.
And we see how this, occurs with fear in our lives.
Yeah. Fear
Yeah.
is a natural response for survival.
Mm,
We don't need to fight for our survival like we used to hundreds or thousands of years ago, even. We
yeah.
are social creatures. So a lot of our fears in the modern era are of a social or societal nature. We're afraid of judgment. We're afraid of doing things in a way that is perceived as wrong or
Mm,
incorrect by others. We've been conditioned a lot of the times to do what we're supposed to do as we are told. And anything that contradicts that, we we are afraid of doing. And that ironically holds us back a lot of the times from living how we truly want to live, from experiencing what we really want to in life.
yeah. And our brain doesn't know the difference between us being afraid of, social uh, situations as opposed to being in the wilderness.
Right.
Our brain is still wired in the same way, and so it responds in the same way that it would have whether you're being chased down by a lion and you're trying to get away, or whether you have a fear of public speaking. It is the same trigger that is happening in the brain.
Exactly. And the
Yeah.
ego just wants to survive. The ego's main priority is to keep its sense of self intact. And so any threat to it is a danger.
Hmm.
Again, it's the difference between rational and irrational fears.
Hmm.
We want to keep that sense of identity alive. So, yeah, anything that threatens it, we're
Absolutely.
going to be afraid of.
It's what it threatens that perception of reality that we have, that we
Yeah,
cling on to. And we experience two things, right? It's fight or flight. And we were speaking about this before. And in the flight, we are just ignorant, avoidant. We just completely ignore what it is, or we will fight. We will create excuses, or we will have we'll blame others as to why we're not doing something that's based on this fear.
exactly.
Yeah. Mm,
Yeah, and this becomes a self fulfilling prophecy because what we focus on, we will make manifest, whether we want it to or not. And our subconscious mind cannot tell the difference between those two things.
mm-hmm.
A
Oh
lot of the
yeah.
time, we talk about or express how we don't want for certain things to happen,
I
or
was about to say
we,
that.
we don't want to express or experience certain things because it, we don't want it to. It'll make us feel uncomfortable, or it'll make us upset, or it'll be inconvenient. The thing is, though, if we don't become aware of how that happens, a lot of these kinds of situations, a lot of these kinds of experiences will be really inconvenient for us
Mhm.
if we lack the
Yeah,
self-awareness to understand that. The things that we don't want to happen, if we focus on that, that's exactly what's going to happen.
absolutely. Just like they say never, because when you say never, you are going to experience that. And I know a lot of people have experienced this. I've had conversations with several people with my mum when in my own experience, I remember when I was 17 and I was in Greece, and this was just prior to meeting my ex-husband Thanos, right? And I was in the Greek street markets with my mother, and we were looking at just various things, clothings and shoes and whatnot that was there. And there was a gypsy woman that was up on one of the tables and was just saying, shouting how, buy shoes for €2 or whatever it was, right? And I remember my mum turning to me and saying to me, "Oh, could you imagine working here?" And I remember my response was like, "Oh God, no way, mum. I would absolutely hate working in the road markets like this. Like, no way. That's never something that I would ever want to experience." And what happens, surely enough, it was about maybe a year later, when I had met Thanos, and his mum had breast cancer and was unable to work for a while. His parents worked in the road markets selling shoes. Now, of course, they weren't up on the benches shouting, but they had a stall in the market selling shoes. And because she wasn't able to work for a time, I went and worked with my father in law to help. And so I saw how, oh my goodness, I remember just saying a year ago how this is something that I never ever wanted to do. And yet here I
Yeah,
am. And look what I am experiencing now. And a lot of people, I'm sure, have very similar experiences in their lives. And it's a very well known saying, isn't it? Never say never.
exactly.
And ultimately, it's that focus on the I never want that. And it comes from a subconscious fear. You may not realize that it's a fear, but it is a fear of doing that thing. And because the focus is just so heavy on the not wanting it, well, you're going to get it because that's what you're focused on.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And if there was something else that you were focused on at the time, wouldn't you have chosen that as an option?
Yeah.
Right? That's how it
Hmm.
works. You were just so unintentionally
Hmm.
focused on not wanting to experience or work at that job that that's what ended
Hmm.
up happening because that's what was right in front of you.
That's right.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
this happens with relationships. Women say they don't like dating jerks
Hmm.
for guys, or they don't like when guys are this or that way, and yet there are subconscious patterns of thinking that draw them to those kinds of guys. you
Yeah.
know they
That's a
complain
very
and they
yeah.
talk about these things with their girlfriends, and yet these are the same exact kinds of situations that they're subconsciously attracted to. Why is that? It's because their
Absolutely.
focus is unintentionally on what they do not want from their partner, instead
Yeah.
of focusing on the things that they do want
You
from
do
their
want
partner.
exactly. Hmm.
And a
And
lot
the
of people
same
do
thing.
that.
Yes, go on.
Yeah, a lot of
Yeah,
people
they
do that.
do. And the same thing can occur when you are in a relationship and you don't want certain things to happen. You may be in fear of your partner cheating on you, or you may be in fear that they may leave you. And when you are in that constant state of fear, without the other person really knowing, subconsciously there's this energy that is constantly projected. And again, I know in my situation with my ex-husband, he really didn't want us to separate. He was so avoidant of it for so long, right? We had multiple conversations and it was coming in, and he knew, after we had separated about a year later when we were quite good friends and speaking about it all openly, he was like, I knew about the same amount of time that I knew, about a year and a half before we separated, that things were not going right. But although he was afraid of it, he wasn't facing the truth of it. And instead, what was his response? His response was to constantly be clinging to me, which of course what happens when that occurs, that pushes me further away. He was constantly clinging, calling, when he wasn't with me, always messaging, and that's just not appealing. And his worst fear, which was us separating, occurred.
Yeah.
And
What he
yeah,
didn't want
it
to happen
just
happened.
exactly, exactly. But that's his whole focus. He couldn't focus on work. He couldn't focus on himself. His whole focus was on our relationship and how it wasn't going right. But then at the same time, in not facing that truth, he also wasn't doing anything to positively impact it either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's realizing that you ultimately have the power to change your circumstances,
Hmm. That's
to
right.
be
And it's
proactive
through,
about your situation,
yeah,
and to
it's
not
through
give
changing your
in,
perception.
yeah,
Hmm.
to your current negative perception of your situation, of your circumstances.
Yeah.
And we're taught to do exactly that. We're taught to complain about our lot in life. We're taught to be constantly whining about the unpleasant or negative circumstances that we're facing instead of focusing on solutions to our
Hmm.
problems. We complain about them. We get together
Yeah.
and we, instead of coming up with solutions with those that we're
Hmm.
close to, we we make time to complain, and that's
Yeah.
really all we do. We don't really talk about how we can make things better. We just talk about how much we don't like what it is that's going on in our life,
Absolutely. And we
in
have such a
politics, in
great,
government,
mhm,
and with regards to
yeah.
our job. We complain about so much. We're taught to do just that. And we see so many
Hmm.
examples of that in our lives, in our family, with our friends. And
Hmm.
yeah, that's why it's so important to take a step back and reflect on how we approach the things that we fear, the things we're insecure about, the things that we don't like, because what's going to keep happening is this self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right. Well,
Things
and
are
I
going to
was going
continue
to
to
give
happen the
this
way we don't want them
the
to. Yeah.
yeah, I was going to give the example of during the COVID-19 pandemic, how people became so fearful of this virus. And sure, people have their reasons of being in fear, but what happened, right? People were restricted to their homes, going out wearing masks, and it's crazy that 2 years later now, you still see people out and about wearing a mask. And throughout this whole pandemic, the focus was on the fear of it, the fear of the spread, the fear of what can happen if you get it. And everybody was in this state of fear that we were not focusing on how can we overcome it, right? What is the solution to it? We're not just looking for a quick treatment of it. Is how do we actually overcome this? And there really wasn't any of that, right? There was no teaching surrounding how to be healthier, how to have a better immune system, how to overcome viruses when you get them, and how your body will be strengthened even if you do, and not to look at it so negatively when you do get sick. People would be so afraid of getting COVID that the fear of getting COVID had them being more sick than actually having it.
Yeah. Because what is
And
stress?
so and
What is stress and
yeah,
anxiety going to do to you but make you sick?
uh-huh,
A lot of
absolutely.
research studies show that cancer is rooted in excess stress.
Hmm.
Excessive anxiety is one of the root causes of cancers in the body. And
Yeah,
so, what do you think is going to happen when you're constantly afraid of not getting sick? You're going to get sick.
you're going
There
to
was
get
a
sick.
coworker at one of my previous jobs who always wore a mask all the time, and yet she would be coughing into her mask. She would have fits of coughing. She was so deathly afraid of getting sick that she was making herself sick.
She was just
And
so
that's what
sick.
people do. That's what
Yeah.
happens.
And there is a fine line between fear and intuition. And it's really important to know the difference because we can play ourselves and
Heavily.
say that we're not doing
Yeah.
something, yes, heavily, right? That, oh, I'm not doing that because my intuition is telling me that I shouldn't do that because this or this or this could occur. Whereas really, it's a fear, and you're just pretending and acting like it's intuition that is telling you not to do that thing. Whereas when it really is intuition, there is a different feeling surrounding intuition. Intuition, it's not really fear that is felt, it's more so concern and awareness that is felt. I know a few years ago, um, gosh, quite a few years ago, it was probably 6 or 7 years ago now. I remember I wanted to get a puppy. And I believe I was looking for one online. I don't know why, but that's how I went about it. And found this adorable little puppy dog that I wanted, right? And I believe I had heard from other people that have, had that had purchased animals that had then, been sent to state or whatnot. I can't remember why I went about it that way. But anyway, I was going back and forth with this person via email. And at the time, I hadn't been exposed to any scams, right? I had no idea what was out there. And they even called me and were like, "We're at the airport and we're ready to send the dog to you. We need you to send the payment through and it'll all get done." And I just remember sort of reflecting on it. I even got to the point where I went to the I went to the news agency to do a Western Union payment. And I even put in all the details, and I remember saying to the guy there, "Just wait. Just something feels off about this. Something feels off, and just let me look into it a little bit more." And I looked into the whole place where they said that they were sending it through, right? The company. And on that company website, it clearly stated, "We do not accept any Western Union payments." And I was like, "Holy shit, remove the details. This is absolutely not right."
So
And
many
why would
scams
they
happen through
be
Western
at
Union.
the
But yeah.
seriously? Oh my gosh, now I know. um, but I remember then thinking, why was this person already at the airport with the dog? I've barely conversated with them about it. And then they turn around and even say to me, so I'm emailing back and forth, saying something about them being Greek. And I was like, "Oh, wow." I'm Greek. So this is my chance to see whether they're real or not, right? I start
Yeah,
writing in
point of
Greek in this
familiarity.
email. And they didn't know how to respond to me. So, so many different factors. I realized that it was a complete scam. And then plus the amount of money that was for the dog was ridiculous. I think it was like $400, which isn't a thing. It costs a lot more, including transportation and all of that. So I knew so that was a gut feeling, right? At the time, I had no idea about intuition either. I just knew that I had a gut instinct that something was off. But you see, I wasn't in fear. It was a complete different feeling in the body. I just knew that there was something wrong with this. And I listened to that feeling and I got myself out of a very sticky situation. Well, not as sticky, but I would have lost money.
Yeah.
um, but that was intuition that was guiding me. Now, fear, on the other hand, I feared getting my driver's license for such a long time. I didn't get my driver's license until I was 28. And I don't know where that fear was rooted. It was clearly, I don't know, potentially from a car accident that we had when I was younger. And I avoided driving for so long. I made excuses, like I had a baby, and then I was like, oh, how am I meant to practice now? We don't have a car that I can practice in. And I procrastinated. But what ended up happening, right? I had to try and get around with public transport. And that is so difficult with young children. You're trying to do the shopping, or you're trying to get somewhere that it will take you 5 minutes by car, and it will take me over an hour in public transport to get somewhere. And it was ridiculous. And I eventually faced that fear, got my driver's license, and so thankful for it, because I could not imagine life without driving now. I feel so sorry when I see a mum with a pram waiting at a bus stop. I saw a lady yesterday and I was just like, oh my gosh, like that was me. Whether it was cold, whether it was hot, whatever it was, I would be out there with the baby in a pram waiting for public transport. And
That's
what we
hard.
also failed,
That
it
is
is,
so
it is
hard.
hard. I did that for many years. But what we fail to see is beneath that fear lies a great skill. And I don't know, we fear it because we actually have such great potential in that thing. So I know I was so afraid of driving, and now I realize what an incredible driver I actually am. I really pride myself on my
Yeah.
driving. And I just see how there are
Incredibly
so
observant,
many.
incredibly vigilant.
Yes, I see people driving and I think, how? How did they get their driver's license? It blows my mind at times. And then I think, why was I so afraid of driving again?
Right.
But that's the trap that we get hooked into, really, is being so afraid of something that we don't do it. But then when we do, we realize how much we can grow from actually doing that thing.
Exactly. From engaging with it
Mhm.
head on directly.
Yeah.
Uh, Thinking back to my earlier years in school, back in
Mhm.
elementary school, this is an example that just came to
Mhm.
mind. It just popped
Yeah.
into my head. I remember how how much of a gamer I was. I still am
Mhm.
at heart, but I was so into games when I was a kid. And in 5th grade, there was a science project that we had to submit at the end of the semester. It was like a semester project,
Mhm.
and I was so nervous about
Mhm.
doing this project and presenting it well. At the time, I was just so deathly afraid of presentations. And instead of learning how to become a better presenter, speaking with my uncle, who
Mhm.
offered to give me advice to be a better speaker, to present better, to have good notes, to
Mhm.
do a good job presenting that project, which my science project was on tornadoes and
Oh,
the
wow.
science of tornadoes. And instead of instead of taking up his offer to learn from him, instead of making sure that I would do a good job presenting my project, I procrastinated. I
Mhm.
made excuses. I played games at every
Yeah.
opportunity I had after school. And and it was all because I didn't want to do a bad job, right, with the
Yeah.
project. But
Right.
ironically, what ended up happening is I gave such a terrible cringe
Oh, no.
presentation, because I put
Yeah.
it together last minute in like the last couple of
Ah,
weeks.
of
My
course.
mom was scrambling with me, going to different libraries and doing research on
Oh,
tornadoes.
yeah.
It's so ridiculous to think back on
Mhm.
that time because it's so obvious that if I had just taken a little bit of time, if I gave a little bit more effort, how drastically different that project could have turned out to be, you know?
Yeah. Mhm.
But because I was so afraid of doing a bad job, I ended up doing a bad job.
Yeah, absolutely. And you also just reminded me of, I don't even know how young I was. I would have been grade 4, I think I was. And I had to I had to say something in assembly. I can't remember, of course, what it was, but I remember that I had memorized my lines, right? I completely knew my lines off by heart. And I was like, oh, well, I know my lines. I don't need to take any notes with me, right? And I was so nervous when it came to that point, and I didn't have any notes with me or anything. And I guess this is what you call stage fright, right? I remember
Right.
going up to the microphone and I was blank. I was so completely blank. I could not remember
Mm.
any lines, and that was so embarrassing for me. And I don't
Oh
remember what
my
happened after
gosh.
that, but I remember how I feared speaking in front of people, and that fear is what has you then have stage fright, right? And then you can forget your lines, and then you think
I
you're
can just
prepared, but
imagine that
you don't
blank
have any backup.
expression on your face.
Oh gosh, it was a pretty big assembly too, from what I remember. But well, it is what it is, right? We learn, and that's ultimately what we need to take from it is what is fear also teaching me?
Right.
Because there's, on when we look at fear without a specific uh, bias to something, right? And you think, okay, why is it that I'm afraid of this thing? Oh, actually, I have another great example that I can give, and I'm sure that many women who have also struggled with their weight can resonate with this. The fear of weighing yourself, getting on the scales, and seeing what the number is, and you avoid it like the plague. It is under a cupboard somewhere, collecting dust, and you won't get onto that scale for the fear of truly seeing what that number is, the reflection, right? Um, but the fact is, no matter what that number shows you, you are what you are. The number isn't going to change anything. The number is you actually looking that fear head on and seeing the truth behind it,
Yeah,
right? Yeah. And
exactly.
so,
And the
what is
reason
fear?
why so many
Hmm.
avoid it is because they don't want to acknowledge the state of their health that they're
Yeah.
in,
Well, they don't want to acknowledge the truth
but
of the fact.
ironically,
Hmm.
they're in bad health because they're avoiding it. You know, it's like
Exactly.
when a
That's
doctor
right.
or when a doctor gives you a call to remind you of your checkup and you don't go because you don't want to
Hmm.
hear the bad news that you might get, quote unquote, because deep down you know that you haven't been really eating right the way that you're supposed to. You've been taking very poor care of yourself health
Hmm.
wise. You don't want for that doctor to confirm what you already suspect, but it's that exact behavior, it's that avoidance that leads to the self-fulfilling prophecy of you having bad health.
Because all you are actually avoiding is the truth.
Yeah, ultimately.
Yeah.
Ultimately, that's what
Ultimately.
fear is.
Yeah.
Our fear is simply avoidance of truth.
Hmm.
As plain and simple as that. We are avoiding what is true.
Yeah. And so,
That's
in order
fear in a
to
nutshell.
in order to overcome fear, it's seeking for that truth and changing that mindset. Again, as we say pretty much in all of our episodes, it's switching that mindset from one of fear to adopting one of growth,
Hmm.
because we realize that fear presents us with so many opportunities for growth.
Yeah,
And when we stop fearing, that is literally what we are seeking is, how can this help me to further grow and develop within myself? And ultimately
exactly.
that's, it leads to being fearless. And there is no greater feeling than living a life without fear. It doesn't mean that you will never have any concerns, right? Concern of not knowing what something may occur, but you let go of the fear of it and you become accepting of the truth, whatever that truth is.
Exactly. And it
And
doesn't
you
mean you'll
live a
never experience
very
fear either.
peaceful, yeah,
It doesn't mean that you'll
oh,
never experience fear. You know, if you're in
no,
front of a
definitely.
lion or a bear, yeah, you're going to experience fear.
Yeah.
You won't be a Zen Buddha in front of the bear, not afraid of getting eaten. No, that's very
No.
much going to be a thing. You just won't allow for the fear to paralyze you. You'll be able to act
Exactly.
appropriately. You'll be able to respond in a way that gives you the absolute best chance of survival in that circumstance. God forbid you don't end up being in front of a bear. But yeah,
Yeah.
should that happen, you'll be able to at least be present enough to give yourself the best chances of survival. That's the whole point. That's what being fearless means. It doesn't mean that you're never going to
Mhm.
experience fear ever. It just means that you will never allow for fear to hold onto you, to allow it to
Hold you
hold
hostage,
you
really.
back.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And so
And
life becomes full of possibility as opposed to being full of risk.
exactly.
Huge paradigm shift.
Massive, massive. And you are able to then introspect and reflect even more on yourself when you see triggers of fear coming up within your body and within your mind. You can use that as a tool to further understand yourself and why it is that you are feeling this fear. It could also even be a fear of a call that you may receive. I know, again, quite a few years back, when I was in a lot of debt with my ex husband and when payments weren't being made. And there was this constant fear of, well, when's the bank going to call? When am I going to get the call from the debt collectors? Or, this constant fear of avoiding the phone because I don't want to receive that phone call. But it doesn't really change anything. It's still a thing. So it's like, instead of being afraid of that occurring, then instead I would make the calls myself, right? I call the bank and I let them know the situation. Then there is nothing to fear in that aspect anymore because I've already spoken to the bank. There's nothing that they can do once you have already spoken about your situation and negotiated on some of the terms with them, right? But we are always fearing the unknown, fearing what outcomes could be. And many times it's out of our control what those outcomes are. And so to fear it and to just avoid it is having it just hanging there, right? And eventually there will probably be this huge, would it be an implosion or an explosion? There's going to be this huge explosion of things that you have not dealt with.
Yeah.
And then
I
you
would
will
say implosion.
eventually
I would say
implosion,
implosion.
right?
You know,
Yeah.
the implosion occurs first, and then the explosion occurs
Yeah.
after. Your inner world will be negatively impacted, and then you'll see
Correct.
that ripple out into the external world. So
That's
yeah,
right.
the implosion occurs first, and if that goes unresolved, an explosion will occur, and you'll begin affecting others because of your
That's
your attitude.
right. And it can all be avoided. It can all be avoided by simply seeing the truth
Exactly.
and accepting the truth. Acceptance is huge.
Yeah.
Being able to accept everything as it is without needing to, wanting to change things to suit your perception.
Yeah. Asking yourself the question,
Hmm.
can I accept reality as it is without needing for it to be the way I want it to be?
Yeah,
Can I do that? And observing what fears come up in raising that question. That will help you identify what you are most afraid of, what you fight so hard to avoid. And body awareness is huge. That's an episode on its own. That is a topic
Hmm.
that we look forward to diving in deeper because awareness is fundamental to becoming more intuitive. Your intuition is rooted in how capable you are of being able to feel what is occurring in your body. Where do you feel the fear in your body? What is your intuition trying to tell you? Where is that feeling centered in? Where is it located? The difference between what you feel in your gut and what you feel in your chest, because
Yeah,
both are expressions of intuition. Both allow us to respond appropriately to what we're afraid of.
absolutely. Even the feeling, the different areas um, on your head, in your brain, you feel the different parts that are activated.
Yeah,
And it's
or different
understanding
parts of your
whether it's
brain,
from,
literally, you
yeah,
feel them lighting up when certain
yeah,
things happen.
that's right. And it's, yeah, it's about becoming so connected to yourself
Yeah,
that you give yourself the space to feel into it all, to feel into your body, to feel into your thoughts, and to really take steps according to what you truly want. Not
yes,
only what you think you should be doing or what people have told you that you should be doing, but what you truly want. Right? That is being truthful. That is trusting in yourself. And that's a huge one.
exactly,
Right? It's when we come to trust ourselves, then we really truly allow for ourselves to see the truth.
yeah,
Because we trust what we will do. We also are then able to trust other people to make decisions for themselves and not allowing that fear to manipulate you into thinking what, or just assuming what somebody else may think or feel. And so you just avoid the conversation, as we spoke of in our last episode, the uncomfortable conversations. We fear what we think their response will be.
exactly,
But when we trust ourselves, we can also trust that what they want is their truth, and we can be accepting of that without
yeah,
needing it to change to suit us. Yeah, it's really important, and it's such a beautiful way to live. There is so much content in living that way because ultimately, who wants someone to be in their life that doesn't really want to be there? Right? I teach our girls this all the time when it comes to friends at school. You must be who you are. And if people cannot accept you for who you are or they want you to change in any way, then they are not your true friends. Because true friends will accept you as you are and shouldn't want you to change to suit their needs. And it is the same for you. You should not want people to change to be your friend because that's not them really being them. And that's not the way that we want to relate to people
exactly,
because that's not authentic. It's not genuine and it eventually will not last. The facade will fall down, it will come off at some point, and then you're left with this illusion that you had created yourself in your mind because you didn't want to accept the truth as it was
exactly.
and
And
all
so
the the
what
impact
you're
that has.
avoiding, loneliness,
Yeah,
is what you end up feeling, even if you're surrounded by a bunch of people. What
yeah,
you end up
that's right.
feeling is exactly what you wanted to avoid.
Hmm.
The inauthenticity of your own behavior and the behavior of those around you cause you to feel alone when that's exactly what you want to avoid. And yet the inauthenticity of everyone involved allows for that to occur anyway. So that's just another
Hmm.
example of how fears, these fears and anxieties become self-fulfilling prophecies. And like Master Oogway from Kung Fu Panda states, one often meets their destiny on the path they take to avoid it. You know,
Hmm.
that's a perfect quote that defines how fear becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. But when you become more aware, the only self-fulfilling prophecies that occur are the ones that you are really intentional about making
Yeah,
manifest. And that's what we want to
exactly.
encourage ourselves to do on a daily basis. And that's what we want to encourage you all to do as well, so that you can live the way that you truly desire to. And that's all a part of harnessing our life force energy. We're going to dive into how to harness our life force energy in the next episode.
We appreciate you joining us. And until next time,
May you embody the way of TBL today in your own way.